Hey everyone, and welcome back. You know how much we love to dig into a good topic? And this one has really got us talking off-air.
Yeah, this one is fascinating.
We're diving deep into Leonardo DiCaprio.
And not just, like the Titanic, Leo.
Right, not just the heartthrob, although we'll definitely be getting to that.
Of course, the 90s were a moment.
A moment indeed.
But it goes way beyond that.
Absolutely. We're talking about his whole career, really, with a special focus on the 90s, obviously, and then really digging into his environmental activism.
Which is really interesting to look at, especially now,
Yeah, how long has he been at this?
Exactly. And what were those early days like for someone with his platform to be talking about climate change back then?
Right, because it wasn't like it is now. It wasn't as mainstream of a topic.
Not at all.
So how did that even start?
Right, and that's what makes it so fascinating to me. We often see celebrities kind of champion causes later in their careers.
Sure, once they've got the platform and the influence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with DiCaprio, that passion for the environment, it seems like it emerged alongside his acting career.
Yeah, he wasn't just jumping on a bandwagon later on.
Not at all. It's like those two threads, the Hollywood star and the environmental advocate, they were always intertwined.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So let's rewind the clock a bit. Before we get to Titanic, set the stage for us. What was the film landscape like back then in the 90s, and how did DiCaprio's early roles kind of fit into that scene?
Well, the 90s were an interesting time for film. You had this real surge in independent films alongside your typical blockbusters.
Right, like Pulp Fiction and Good Will Hunting.
Exactly. Those are great examples. And at the same time, you had the rise of the internet, which was starting to influence how people discovered and engaged with movies.
It was a whole new world.
It really was. And DiCaprio, even in those early roles, he seemed drawn to projects that really offered him some complexity.
Yeah, he wasn't just going for the easy roles.
Not at all. He wanted depth. He wanted a challenge. Films like What's Eating Gilbert, Grape, and the Basketball Diaries.
Oh, those are great films.
Right, and they showcased his range, his willingness to tackle these really challenging characters.
It was a far cry from, like, the stereotypical teen idol roles, which, I mean, he could have easily gone down that path after Growing Pains.
Oh, absolutely. He had the looks for it. He had the charm, but he was making these interesting choices even then.
So he was already proving himself as a serious actor.
Okay, let's talk Titanic, the movie that really launched him into superstardom.
Titanic mania.
It was more than a blockbuster. It was a cultural phenomenon. I mean, we were all obsessed.
Oh, everyone was quoting lines, wearing the
The
clothes.
soundtrack was everywhere.
It was inescapable.
It really was. So what was it about that film, besides Leo and those amazing blue eyes, that resonated so deeply with audiences at the time?
Well, it definitely tapped into this resurgence of these big romantic epics in the 90s,
Yeah.
But it also had this really timeless love story.
And it was set against this backdrop of real historical tragedy.
Exactly. And I think that combination really resonated with audiences across generations. And you can't argue with its box office success, over $2 billion.
It's still one of the highest grossing films of all time. Exactly. That speaks volumes about its impact.
It's pretty amazing to think that while all this was happening, all this Titanic mania, DiCaprio was already starting to use his platform to talk about something else, that he was passionate about something completely different, climate change.
It's true. And this wasn't just, a passing interest or anything like that. Even during all the Titanic craziness, there are reports of him having these deep conversations with the crew about environmental concerns.
Really? On the set of Titanic?
Yeah, he was apparently really concerned about the environmental impact of the production, like the amount of waste generated by a film that big.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, and he actually convinced James Cameron to adopt some more eco-friendly practices on set.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So he wasn't just talking about it. He was actually trying to make a difference even back then.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't just behind-the-scenes activism either. He was actually publicly speaking about the need to protect the rainforest during interviews.
On MTV?
Even on MTV. This was like peak 90s heartthrob Leo, and he's using his platform to talk about the rainforest.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
He wasn't shying away from potentially controversial topics, even as his star was rising.
Not at all. He was using his voice, even then, to bring attention to issues that he cared about.
So you mentioned his interview about the rainforest. Was that connected to any specific work he was doing at the time, or was this more about raising awareness in general?
It was both, actually. You see, DiCaprio's interest in the rainforest, it went beyond just a casual concern. He'd actually been captivated by the rainforest and its biodiversity since he was a kid.
Really? So this was like a lifelong passion.
Yeah, and by that point, he was already financially supporting conservation efforts. He was putting his money where his mouth was.
That's a powerful distinction.
Wow.
It wasn't just about aligning with a trendy cause. It was about aligning with something that he truly believed in.
Absolutely. And this proactive approach, this idea of taking action, is really evident in a major step that he took just a year after Titanic took the world by storm.
What's that?
The establishment of the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation.
The Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation.
Yeah.
Huh? That's a big step. So 1998, that's like peak Leo mania, right after Titanic was everywhere. And he decides to start a foundation.
Wow. What can you tell us about those early years and what their mission was? It really shows, like this wasn't just some publicity stunt riding the wave of Titanic. This was about making a real difference and a lasting one at that. In those early years, they were very focused on protecting biodiversity hotspots.
Like the rainforest.
Exactly. The Amazon rainforest was a major focus for them, which makes sense considering DiCaprio's longtime passion for it. They were funding a lot of on-the-ground conservation efforts, working directly with local communities.
So it's about supporting those grassroots initiatives and really collaborating with the people who are living in and around these places. Not just, writing a check and calling it a day.
Exactly. It was about empowering those communities and making sure that conservation efforts were sustainable in the long run.
It sounds like he was learning and evolving alongside the environmental movement itself.
Absolutely. The late 90s saw this growing understanding of climate change, as this complex, interconnected issue. And DiCaprio's approach really reflected that. It wasn't just about one issue. It was about seeing the bigger picture.
And that's what's so cool about going through all of this material. It's like you can see that evolution happening in real time.
I see.
It's one thing to talk about saving the rainforest, but the scope of the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation is massive. What were some of the other key areas that they were focused on besides rainforest preservation?
Well, they quickly expanded to encompass a whole range of environmental challenges: ocean conservation, protecting endangered species, promoting renewable energy, and of course, tackling climate change. And they weren't afraid to get into the nitty-gritty of these issues either, funding scientific research, advocating for policy changes, and supporting sustainable development projects all over the world.
It's like they were attacking these problems from every angle. Science policy, grassroots support. A very multifaceted approach.
But how did DiCaprio himself make that transition from passionate advocate to an environmental thought leader? How did that happen?
That's a great question. And I think it really speaks to his commitment to using his platform effectively. He wasn't content with just lending his name to a cause. He wanted to really understand these issues himself so that he could turn around and educate others. He started working with these leading environmentalists and scientists, really learning about the intricacies of climate change. And then he would use his voice to amplify their message. So he was like aligning himself with the experts, learning from the best, and then using his platform to help them reach a wider audience. Very strategic.
Exactly. He understood the power of his platform, and he wanted to use it responsibly.
But was the public receptive to this whole Hollywood heartthrob turned environmental advocate thing? Was there any pushback?
There's always skepticism with celebrity activism. People wonder if it's genuine or just a way to boost their image. But DiCaprio's dedication was clear. He wasn't just talking the talk, he was walking the walk. And I think that started to change people's minds.
So how did he prove his commitment? What were some of the things he was doing that showed he was serious about this?
Well, for one thing, he put his money where his mouth was. He was donating millions of dollars to environmental causes through his foundation. But he was also using his platform to produce and star in documentaries like The 11th Hour, which came out in 2007.
Oh, yeah. That was like a really powerful film.
Yeah.
A bit of a wake-up call about the state of the planet.
Exactly. It featured interviews with all these top scientists and activists really laying out the challenges we were facing.
And that was before The Flood and Ice on Fire, his more recent films, right? Yeah. So he's been at this for a while now. Was there a noticeable shift in his approach to filmmaking with those later documentaries? Like, did they build upon the work he was already doing with the foundation?
Absolutely. Before The Flood, which came out in 2016, took a much more personal approach. You see DiCaprio as the narrator, and he's like this on-screen guide taking viewers all over the globe. He shows the devastating impacts of climate change firsthand and explores these potential solutions.
I remember that film being really impactful. You could tell that he was deeply affected by what he was seeing and experiencing.
Exactly. It wasn't just about presenting facts. It was about connecting with viewers on an emotional level, making them feel the urgency of the situation. And then Ice on Fire in 2019 took a bit of a different approach.
Yeah, it felt a little more hopeful. right? Like, it was less about the doom and gloom of climate change and more about showcasing all these innovative technologies and strategies that were being developed to combat it.
Yeah.
It felt like it offered a sense of hope, like there are things we can do to turn this ship around.
Yeah, exactly. And that was really the point of the film, to highlight the potential for human ingenuity to address the climate crisis.
And it wasn't just pie-in-the-sky ideas either. They showcased some really cutting-edge technologies and community-led initiatives that were already making a difference.
Right. It was about empowering people with the knowledge that they weren't powerless. Like we can make a difference if we act now.
It's interesting to see how DiCaprio used these different filmmaking styles to engage audiences.
Yeah.
From the stark warnings of the 11th hour to that more personal journey in Before the Flood, and then the solutions-oriented approach of Ice on Fire. He's clearly experimenting with different ways to spark a conversation and inspire action.
And that's what I think is so remarkable about his journey. He's constantly seeking out new ways to connect with people, to make these complex issues like climate change more understandable and accessible, and to really highlight the importance of both individual and collective action.
Yeah, he's not just telling people what to do. He's showing them that it's possible to make a difference.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes him such an effective advocate. He leads by example.
This deep dive has been fascinating. It really highlights how DiCaprio's commitment to environmentalism has been a constant throughout his entire career. From those early days of speaking out about the rainforest to establishing a foundation and producing these really impactful documentaries, he's used his platform to amplify the message of conservation and sustainability every step of the way.
And his influence extends way beyond his own projects, too. He's become a really powerful voice in the environmental movement. He leverages his celebrity to advocate for policy changes. He supports sustainable businesses, and he inspires countless others to join the fight against climate change.
He's gone from teen heartthrob to a respected figure in the environmental community. It's amazing to see.
He's proof that you can evolve and use your platform for good no matter where you start.
Well said. It's clear that Leonardo DiCaprio is so much more than just an actor. He's a dedicated advocate using his voice and his influence to make a real difference in the world. It's been a real pleasure diving into his story today.
It really has, and it leaves us with a lot to think about,
It does.
How has celebrity activism evolved since DiCaprio first started speaking out? What impact has he had on how we view the role of celebrities in addressing these big global challenges?
And what can we learn from his example? How can we find our own ways to contribute to a more sustainable future?
Exactly. These are questions we should all be asking ourselves.
Well said. It's been quite a journey from Titanic to tackling climate change. It just goes to show that even amidst all the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, a genuine commitment to a cause can create ripples of change that extend far beyond the big screen. Thanks for joining us on this insightful deep dive into the world of Leonardo DiCaprio, the actor, the activist, and the agent of change.